Tonight, we're learning new details in the death of legendary actor Gene Hackman.
Deaths of Oscar-winning actor Gene Hackman and his wife, whose bodies were found in their Santa Fe home.
What started as a quiet disappearance has now taken a darker turn. New evidence uncovered inside Gene Hackman's private property is raising questions no one expected.
This was such a mystery for investigators. We have now received a trove of new information, first-person view of the officers as they found the couple dead at home.
And the answers are far from reassuring. For weeks, no one realized anything was wrong inside that Santa Fe home. But when authorities finally stepped in, what they found inside those separate rooms told a story.
The authorities in Los Angeles have been giving more detail. They say he died from heart disease after his wife passed away from a rare infectious illness.
That didn't add up at first. And now, with new details surfacing, the truth feels even more unsettling than before. What authorities found on camera will shock you. For days, the public was left piecing together fragments, speculation, rumors, and half-formed theories about what really happened inside Gene Hackman's quiet Santa Fe home. But then, something shifted. New evidence was officially released, and with it came a version of events far more grounded, yet somehow even more unsettling. In early April 2025, a court ruling forced Santa Fe County to make the investigation records public, including body camera footage from the responding deputies. There was one strict limitation: nothing could show the bodies. The decision followed a legal push from Julia Peters, the estate's representative, who argued that the family deserved privacy during an already devastating time. The court agreed, but also made it clear that the public had a right to understand how the situation unfolded. When the footage finally surfaced, it didn't look dramatic at first. No chaos, no forced entry, just officers stepping into what seemed like an ordinary home on February 26th. Outside, two workers stood visibly shaken, trying to explain what they had seen. Inside, deputies moved cautiously, even checking for a gas leak, something that was quickly ruled out. But as the minutes passed, the tone shifted. One clip showed a dog sitting quietly near where Betsy was found, almost as if it had been guarding her. Another captured a calm but chilling phone call between a deputy and Gene's daughter, discussing what to do next, including the family dog. These weren't dramatic moments, but they felt heavy, real, final. And just when it seemed like the official footage had settled the story, a new voice entered the conversation. Someone who had been close to the couple for years. Because the man who discovered them was finally ready to speak, and what he revealed would challenge everything people thought they knew. The man who discovered the truth inside the house. Long before authorities stepped inside the house, there was already someone quietly sensing that something wasn't right. His name was Jesse Kessler, a contractor who had worked on the Hackman property for over 16 years. This wasn't just a job to him. Over time, he had become one of the few people familiar with the rhythms of that home, the routines, the small details most outsiders would never notice. And that's exactly why the silence stood out. According to Kessler, Betsy Arakawa was always the one who kept things running smoothly. She was consistent, organized, and constantly in touch. Every few days, without fail, she would send emails, updates, requests, reminders about projects around the property. It had been that way for years, until suddenly it wasn't. One message came through, short, unusually brief, and lacking the tone he was used to. Then, after that, nothing. No follow-ups, no replies, no check-ins, just complete silence. At first, he tried to ignore the feeling that something was off. Gene and Betsy were known for valuing their privacy, and Kessler didn't want to overstep. But as days turned into weeks, the concern grew heavier. After nearly 3 weeks without a single word, he decided to take action. Before making anything official, he reached out to someone in law enforcement, asking how a welfare check worked and what steps were involved. But even before that process could fully begin, he made a decision. He would go there himself. On February 26th, Kessler drove up to the property. What happened next only deepened his concern. As he arrived, he crossed paths with a pest control worker who was just leaving. During their brief conversation, the worker casually mentioned something that immediately stood out. The dogs were outside, roaming freely. That alone was enough to set off alarm bells. According to Kessler, that was something Betsy would never allow under any circumstances. That detail changed everything. Now fully unsettled, Kessler walked toward the house with a maintenance worker, Roland Lowe Begay. Step by step, the tension built. Something didn't feel right, and both of them could sense it. When they finally reached a window and looked inside, what they saw froze them in place. A figure, motionless, lying on the floor. That was the moment Kessler stopped hesitating. He pulled out his phone and made the call that would soon send shockwaves far beyond Santa Fe. In the days that followed, as theories began spreading online, some claiming hidden passages, secret tunnels, and elaborate scenarios, Kessler didn't stay quiet. He pushed back firmly. According to him, there were no hidden structures, no secret spaces beneath the home. He had worked on every part of that property for over a decade and knew it inside out. What happened there didn't need exaggeration, because the truth, as he saw it, was already devastating enough on its own. But when investigators finally stepped inside and began piecing everything together, what they found didn't immediately bring clarity. In fact, it only raised more questions. Questions about how two people could end up in completely different parts of the house, and why nothing around them seemed disturbed at all. What investigators found left them puzzled. When deputies finally stepped inside the home, they expected to find answers. Instead, they walked into a scene that only deepened the mystery. Nothing looked forced. The front door wasn't broken. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no missing valuables. Everything appeared almost untouched. But then came the detail that immediately stood out. Two people found in completely different parts of the house. Betsy Arakawa was discovered near the front area, inside a bathroom. Close to her was an open prescription bottle, pills scattered nearby, and a small space heater positioned not far from where she lay. The environment showed signs that she had been there for some time, with the dry air inside the home accelerating visible changes. Just a short distance away, in a confined space inside a bathroom closet, was their dog, Zina. The dog had been placed in a crate, likely for recovery after a recent medical procedure, but now it had also become part of a scene no one was prepared to process. Gene Hackman was found elsewhere entirely, near the kitchen area, in a mudroom. He was on the floor, with a cane and sunglasses beside him. The position suggested something sudden, as if he had collapsed mid-movement without any chance to react. Meanwhile, two other dogs were alive, moving freely between the house and the yard through a small access door. Investigators began carefully scanning every corner, searching for anything that could explain what they were seeing. One officer briefly considered the possibility of a gas leak, but that idea was quickly dismissed. The home itself remained undisturbed, artwork still hanging perfectly, belongings in place. No indication of intrusion, and yet something about it all felt off. Two separate locations, no signs of disturbance. One dog confined, two others roaming. It didn't align in a way that made immediate sense. That's when a single word entered the official report, one that would change how the case was viewed moving forward. Suspicious. And once that label surfaced, everything escalated. Because while the scene raised questions, the real answers weren't going to come from what was visible, but from something much smaller, hidden deep inside Gene Hackman's body, quietly recording the final moments all along, the medical clue that changed everything. The first real answers didn't come from the house, the witnesses, or even the footage. They came from something far more precise, a device that had been quietly recording everything all along. Inside Gene Hackman's chest was a biventricular pacemaker, implanted years earlier to manage his ongoing heart condition. It wasn't just keeping him alive, it was tracking every heartbeat, every irregular rhythm, every moment his heart struggled. When investigators accessed the data, they finally had something solid to work with: a timeline. The device showed its last recorded activity on February 17th. Then, on February 18th, it detected a serious irregular rhythm: atrial fibrillation. After that, there was nothing. No recovery, no correction, just silence. For a man who had lived through decades of intense work, health challenges, and a long career in the public eye, this was where everything stopped, quietly, without warning, inside his own home. The medical examiner later confirmed that February 18th was most likely the day Gene passed. But that discovery only solved half the puzzle. Because when investigators compared his condition to Betsy's, something didn't line up. Her body showed signs that suggested she had been gone longer, which meant one thing: she had died first. And that realization shifted the entire direction of the investigation. Now the focus turned to her final days. What she did, who she contacted, where she went. Every detail suddenly mattered, because somewhere in those final hours was the missing piece. And what they uncovered next wasn't dramatic or chaotic. It was ordinary, quiet routines, simple errands, small decisions. The kind that no one realizes are their last, until it's too late. The final day, no one realized, was the last. What investigators uncovered next didn't look alarming at first. In fact, it looked like an ordinary day, routine, calm, and completely unremarkable. But that's exactly what made it unsettling. On February 11th, Betsy Arakawa went about her day as usual. Late in the morning, she sent a short message to her massage therapist, explaining that Gene wasn't feeling well. She mentioned symptoms that sounded like a common illness, something mild, something manageable. To be cautious, she decided to cancel her appointment. It was a simple, responsible decision from someone who was used to handling everything at home. After that, she stepped out. Security footage later tracked her movements throughout the day. She visited a grocery store, walked through the aisles at a steady pace, and picked up what she needed. From there, she stopped by a pharmacy, then a local pet store, continuing a routine that showed no signs of urgency or distress. By early evening, records confirmed she had returned home. That was the last confirmed moment she was seen outside. The following morning, something shifted. Betsy began searching for answers online. Investigators later found that she had been looking up symptoms: flu-like conditions, respiratory issues, dizziness, even breathing techniques. These weren't random searches. They suggested concern, possibly growing worry about what she or Gene might have been experiencing. Then came the calls. She reached out to a private medical service in Santa Fe, Cloudberry Health, multiple times. This wasn't her first interaction with them. She had previously contacted the clinic regarding Gene's health, and she had even scheduled an appointment for herself that same day. But something didn't go as planned. When the clinic returned her calls, there was no response. The appointment came and went. Follow-up attempts led straight to voicemail. No answer, no explanation. And just like that, everything stopped. Her phone activity ended. Her emails stopped. The constant communication she was known for, gone without warning. The person who managed every detail of their lives, who kept everything running behind the scenes, had suddenly disappeared from the outside world. And inside that house, Gene was still there, still moving, still alive, unaware that the one person holding everything together was no longer able to. And what happened next inside those walls would become the most haunting part of this entire story, because it wasn't immediate and it wasn't loud. It was slow, quiet, and deeply unsettling. The most disturbing part of the entire timeline. This is the part of the timeline that continues to unsettle people the most. For roughly a full week, Gene Hackman remained inside that Santa Fe home, completely alone. Not alone in the usual sense, but alone with no awareness, no clarity, and no one left to guide him through his daily life. According to the medical examiner, Dr. Heather Jarrell, Gene was already in an advanced stage of Alzheimer's disease. In her assessment, it was entirely possible that he never fully understood what had happened to Betsy. That detail changes everything, because it means he may have been moving through the house without context, walking the same hallways, entering the same rooms, passing the same spaces, without recognizing the reality of what was right in front of him. Friends had already noticed changes in his condition long before this incident. He had become increasingly withdrawn, rarely leaving the house, no longer engaging in the routines he once enjoyed. The person who once had a structured, active life had slowly shifted into one centered entirely around Betsy's care and presence. She wasn't just his partner. She was his anchor to daily life. And once that anchor was gone, everything began to fall apart. The autopsy findings added another layer to the story. Gene's stomach was completely empty, no food detected at all. A toxicology analysis also showed elevated acetone levels, a sign consistent with prolonged fasting. While he was not severely dehydrated, evidence suggested he may have still been drinking small amounts of water, possibly from the kitchen, but eating had stopped entirely. Whether it was confusion, memory loss, or an inability to manage basic needs without help, no one can say for certain. What is clear is that he survived in a severely diminished state for several days. There was no caregiver present in the home. That responsibility had always fallen to Betsy. She handled his medication, his meals, his schedule, everything. When she died unexpectedly, that entire system collapsed instantly. Even the smallest routines disappeared. And then there was the third life inside that house. Zina, the family dog, had been placed in a crate for recovery after a medical procedure. Without anyone to release her, she remained trapped as the days passed. Eventually, she did not survive. 3 lives, 1 home. A silence that stretched longer than anyone realized. But even now, one question still remains unresolved, because while the timeline explains what happened inside the house, it still doesn't fully explain how everything aligned the way it did. And the answer to that leads investigators into something far more unsettling: the final cause behind Betsy's sudden decline and the invisible threat no one saw coming. The invisible killer behind the entire tragedy. The final piece of the investigation didn't come from speculation, witnesses, or even the timeline. It came from medicine, specifically a rare and often misunderstood disease that quietly set everything in motion. After extensive testing and review, authorities determined that Betsy Arakawa had likely died from hantavirus pulmonary syndrome. It's a condition most people have never heard of, yet it exists quietly in certain regions, including parts of the southwestern United States. The virus is carried primarily by deer mice, and humans can become infected by inhaling microscopic particles from contaminated droppings, urine, or nesting materials. At first, the symptoms don't raise alarm. They look ordinary: fever, fatigue, muscle aches, maybe even a mild cough. Something easily mistaken for the flu. That's what makes it so dangerous. By the time people realize something is seriously wrong, the illness can progress rapidly into respiratory failure, and in many cases, there is very little time to react. In Betsy's case, the early signs appeared to match that first stage. Her online searches reflected growing concern about flu-like symptoms, dizziness, and breathing discomfort. She even looked into treatment options and contacted a private medical clinic multiple times, likely trying to understand what was happening before it escalated. But the progression of hantavirus can be brutal and fast. Once it reaches the lungs, fluid begins to accumulate, making breathing increasingly difficult. In severe cases, patients can deteriorate within hours. In the southwestern region of the United States, the fatality rate has been reported between roughly 38 and 50%, making it one of the most dangerous yet rare respiratory viruses in the area. When environmental investigators examined the Hackman property, they found something that helped confirm the diagnosis. While the main residence was relatively clean, the surrounding structures told a different story. In garages, storage areas, and outbuildings scattered across the estate. There were clear signs of rodent activity, droppings, nests, and evidence of infestation. Even vehicles on the property showed signs that mice had been present. And most importantly, live traps had been set. That detail suggests the couple was aware of a rodent problem. They just didn't know the risk it carried. Betsy's illness likely escalated quickly from what seemed like a common flu into something far more severe. And once she collapsed, everything she was responsible for, Gene's care, the household, the daily structure of their lives, came to an immediate halt. Gene's own medical tests later confirmed he did not have the virus. His cause of death was unrelated, tied instead to his heart condition and the effects of prolonged neglect after Betsy was gone. But by then, the damage had already unfolded across days of silence. What began as a quiet, unnoticed infection inside a rural home ultimately triggered a chain reaction no one could stop. And in the end, it wasn't just illness or age or circumstance that defined this tragedy. It was timing, isolation, and a silence that stretched just long enough for everything to fall apart. Because sometimes the most devastating stories don't begin with violence or chaos. They begin with something as ordinary as feeling sick. Thanks for watching. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dive investigations. Click the next video for another real story.